Welcome to the James and Heather Show. I'm Heather Dawn.
And I'm James Guay, and we are giving you the best of health, love, and relationship advice.
Oh yeah, we are. And we've got some really good, intense stuff to talk about today.
We are talking about taming your inner critic.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Mental Health Day today.
Hello. Well, it's an interesting thing because I think a lot of clients that I see, a lot of my own personal experience. I mean, I literally went in high school, middle school, from literally hating myself to learning to be more tolerant, to learning to be more accepting.
Well,
and
I mean,
eventually, that self-love stuff, right?
There's a lot to hate. Look how unattractive you are. You've got no muscles. I mean, that hair is just terrible. Those thick curl waves. Those big high cheekbones.
You're gonna make me embarrassed now.
The biceps. I could see why I would be hating on this. I'd be hating on it all day long. The intelligence.
Oh my.
It's gotta be hard. I got him to blush.
You did. Yeah. Congratulations. So talk about your inner critic.
Oh yeah,
Heather.
my inner critic. My inner critic sounds like you're not good enough. You'll never be good enough.
Oh, lovely. Don't you love it?
Nothing you could ever do will be good enough.
Oh.
And have a nice night.
Yeah, isn't that a nice one? Our inner critics can be absolutely ruthless.
Oh wait, I'm not lovable enough either. That's another
just
good story.
Throw that one in there.
I should throw in the towel and die today.
Lovely. Oh my gosh. Ouch.
Yeah, my inner critic's pretty nasty.
That sounds pretty
I know.
nasty.
I had to take her to therapy a lot.
Yeah. So again, it's oftentimes, it's this symbolic representation, this inner critic, of the ways that we judge ourselves. It's usually just a part of us, but it can be this really loud and obnoxious part of us that just judges, criticizes, compares, contrasts, condemns us, attacks us no matter what we do, no matter what we say.
And here's the thing, I mean, your inner critic is your inner critic, right? But what you're measuring it against is what I'm assuming most non-sociopathic people want in their lives, which is to be healthy, happy, and whole.
Yeah.
I like to assume that most people wake up in the morning are like, oh, I have the most amazing day. I hope all my wishes come true, that I get to share love. I'm hoping that that's what people wake up and
I
think,
would hope that
I
too,
can feel
but
safe
so
and
often
secure.
not the case.
I know, but, I'm saying, again, there are some people out there that are like, I hope I go kill someone today. I'm not talking about that, but they're not bothered by their inner critic.
I hear
They're
you.
feeding it fuel.
Right.
Right. So when we're looking at something like the inner critic, it's like, okay, I'm assuming that you're waking up in the morning and go, how can I be more happy? How can I be more in tune with my health? Experience love, get my security needs met, and so on and so forth. And so you often have to take a look at those roadblocks. And one of those roadblocks aren't necessarily coming from outside you; they're coming from inside you, and they're usually hidden behind that nasty little critic.
Right.
Which can be quite entertaining when you start learning how to develop the relationship that James and I have developed with our inner critic, which is why we can laugh at ours.
Right.
And we're hoping to get you to this place with some advice that we can give you today, because we do have experience here.
Yeah, absolutely, lived experience. And it's also recognizing for some people they wake up hopeless and depressed. And partially that can be about sort of that self-judgment, self-recrimination, that, again, the things
Sabotaging self-talk.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
Well stated.
Yeah, that's your inner critic at play. And again, everything in balance is what's necessary. So your inner critic is, as James was saying, it judges, it criticizes, it compares and condemns and attacks. But you do need judgment in your life, and James and I like to look at it more as discernment.
Right, sort of mindful discernment, where we're recognizing if there's something that we need to do differently, if we need to respond to a particular situation differently. But again, when we're saying judgment, we're not saying moral judgment when it comes to discernment.
Not condemnation.
Right. So it's like, okay, we're judging that this, sofa that we're sitting on will hold us. We're risking that it might fall apart. Probably not, but we recognize.
You don't know where I got it.
Oh, that's true, huh? So again, we need to have some level of discernment, some level of non-moralistic judgment, where we're recognizing if we need to alter the situation to some extent.
And so sometimes when we're trying to, heal the voice of this inner critic, we have to assess, where does it come from? Where does this sabotaging behavior come from? A lot of times we were raised by it.
if you're like me,
Yeah.
who grew up in a little bit more legalistic, religious, fundamentalist upbringing, there's a certain level of perfectionism that even though there's this belief that we're saved by the grace of God, that we're somehow fundamentally flawed. It's this concept of original sin. So all of this can sort of enhance and, sort of magnify our felt sense of being unworthy, right? And so if you're living in a household, or have before, where everything was scrutinized, the overanalyzed, that you could never do or be good enough, if you were gay like me, living in a religious household, that you were going to hell.
You're gay?
An abomination to God.
You're gay?
This is my coming out video.
James Gay is gay.
Right.
This is ridiculous.
Call me Mr. Queer.
If I had known that I was partnered with like a rainbow fanatic, I don't know if I would have done
You're
the show.
out there marching with me. Who are you fooling? So again, we often learn, our inner critic learns how to be this way from our parents, from family, from peers, through politicians, through media. There's a lot of criticism, a lot of judgments for how we look, how we behave, how we talk, all these kinds of things, and it can wreak havoc, and we can end up doing that ourselves in hopes that it'll protect us from hearing it from the outside. If we do it first ourselves, change the behavior, then maybe we can limit the amount of criticism and judgment that we get from others, and then we can have love.
And I just want to say that when you go to do like where the discovery process, where does this come from? Just be careful not to set up camp in it. Right? Mm-hmm. You're going back in time solely to find the root to a very long pattern of self-sabotage.
Good point.
Once you find that root, feel free to get out.
Yeah, don't have to live there.
It's not, I just find oftentimes, especially with me as a life coach or personal transformation, I work a lot on, people have been in therapy for 20, 30 years. I can relate. I went to a lot of therapy.
Makes you a better coach.
Yeah. You just keep going in and sort of rehashing the same pattern. And at some point you have to be like, okay, like time to move forward.
Right.
We're not trying to move backward except to get a point of view and see where a pattern started and then move forward.
Right.
It's important to get out of there. And then understanding too, the process, I think, to working with your inner critic or any type of self-sabotaging behavior is not to avoid it, to lean into it and kind of befriend it on some levels. It's like the bully at school. If you keep going, and he gets angry and pounds harder, and you get angrier and they pound harder. And instead of taking on that tactic of avoidance or attack with the parts of yourself that you don't like, instead be like, hey, buddy.
What's going on there?
What's going on? Oh, I'm a worthless piece of shit. Oh, that's so fascinating. Separate yourself from it. When I was working with my inner critic, I had to sort of develop a technique where I created a separation of sense. In meditation, you're taught to become the observer, and so you're witnessing different things that are going on in your body and your mind and your energy. And I did the same technique with parts of myself that just weren't really healthy, happy, and whole. Right. And I was just like, oh, really? That's so interesting. I'm not good enough in that relationship. Got it. Thank you so much for sharing.
Right.
Off to Angel Boot Camp for you. Right? So.
Well, and for a lot of people, having some level of distance, that mindfulness actually can be a tool for that, right? So if we're able to sort of disengage from being in the experience, to be curious about what's going on, to learn better, like what's happening.
Like your mic is
My
dying.
little microphone's going down.
Your
That's
mic's
fine.
gone soft and it's going down on you.
You're distracting me.
Sorry.
So a really useful tool in working with our inner critic is this sense of mindfulness. So when you talk about distance from the inner critic, sometimes stepping back, getting a little bit more of an objective perspective, being curious about why that part of ourselves is judging ourselves so viciously, right? Where is it coming from? What's going on? Sometimes even sort of envisioning, like using visual imagery to imagine it being like on your computer screen, like you're watching us right now, that it's further removed. It's not in you, it's sort of separate from you. Any kind of strategy or technique like that can help you to understand that it's just a part of you, not all of you. So another thing is to recognize that like you're saying, it's not effective to go to battle with your inner critic usually, because the inner critic will almost always win. It knows you better than anyone else, and it can pick apart your logic and your argument. So this is about doing a complete paradigm shift and coming at it from a more mindful, compassionate, caring, curious kind of way, so that you can sort of take out the venom from the inner critic.
Exactly.
That was a mouthful.
No, but I would also say, mindfulness is a tool to give you some space and distance between the parts of you that are not being kind to yourself, which will ultimately be the reasons why you're not kind to others, or allow others to be not kind to you.
Right.
But there is a process of grieving, I have found, too. When getting into my inner critic, the part of me that was just like, please go roll up and die, thank you, like that inner critic. When I've had to deal with those aspects of myself, I did find that there was a two-part process going on, maybe more parts. But one part was to start to create space and become a little bit mindful about these things. And the other part was to, sometimes I had to sit with the feelings that the inner critic was feeling, right? That lack of worth,
right?
The not being good enough, maybe the trauma that might have been connected to it, whatever it was, cruel kids at school that were just horrible to you. And
right.
I certainly was bullied at one point in summer camp, and it was absolutely horrible. It scarred me forever, and I thought I would go drown myself in a lake or something. The kids were just so unbelievably
it can
cruel.
be awful and ruthless.
Yeah. So, sometimes you just need to also sit with that wound for a moment. Even if you intellectually thought you were over it, your inner critic may have a different opinion on the matter.
Right.
Again, that doesn't mean setting up camp and walking around, for 20 years, 10 years, 5 years. There was that time, and then you use that wound to justify your excuse to be in pain all the time.
Right.
That's not okay. But there is a balance between sort of feeling the wound and then also just creating space between you and that wound, and so you can get present, mindful, be today.
Right. It's about not overindulging, but also not ignoring and sweeping it under the carpet, right? So the more that we can kind of lean in, be present, get to know this part of ourselves, the more we can learn how to navigate. Now, for some of you, it feels like that is like your inner critic is so loud that that's all you hear and that's all you've heard for your entire life. So you're like, I am inundated with it. I already know it, and it's excruciating, right? It sounds like you've done that level of like investigation, getting to know. So at this point, it can be useful to sort of sift the truth from the myths, right? So oftentimes there's a granular sort of aspect of truth in what the inner critic says, but then sort of sweeps in all this moralistic judgment, so then you believe everything that it has to say. If you're able to actually sift out what aspect of it is accurate versus what aspect of it is judgmental, then you can kind of take what you need to from it, adjust your life accordingly, and then hopefully also help to kind of soothe some of that impetus for the inner critic being there in the first place.
And to remember, too, that your inner critic isn't there to take you down and have you roll up in a ball and die. Your inner critic is actually there to protect you. So I've often talked to clients about this who struggle with anxiety. And, anxiety, too, even though it's extremely uncomfortable, it's something I have dealt with in my youth. I had panic attacks. But, it is a protection mechanism that's kicking in. The inner critic is protecting you so that you don't feel too vulnerable, that you don't get rejected, that you don't get hurt. And so oftentimes you have to remember that when you're dealing with your inner critic and you're creating that space and you're getting involved with that wound for a moment, that the inner critic really is there not to be some harsh jerk off inside you. It's sitting there going, I got it, I'm protecting, because when you were young and didn't maybe have as much personal power, that inner critic was really smart in what they did for you and deserves kudos, right?
Yeah.
That inner critic was there to protect you. It's just the software needs to be updated now.
Yeah, and it can be difficult to see that there's a self-protective mechanism in it, because it can be so painful, so debilitating. It can get in the way of enjoying your life. It can lead to perfectionism. It can lead to sort of like this experience of the hungry ghost, that no matter what you do or what accomplishments you make,
You're still not good enough.
You're still not good enough, right? So again, it can be hard to see that there's this aspect that's actually useful about about it. But in doing that, again, it can kind of help to lessen some of the intensity. It can lower the volume of the inner critic.
Correct. So, how you can heal is, and we've mentioned this a few times in this episode, use awareness and mindfulness techniques as opposed to avoidance. Try working with discernment instead of criticism and harsh moralistic judgments.
Right.
Listen and take necessary action, not being reactive.
Right, absolutely.
Right?
No, that's important.
Setting boundaries with yourself. Imagine, one of the techniques I've given clients is to take that inner critic, or sometimes I'm dealing with a complainer or a worrier, and let's put that in a person outside of ourselves. Would you sit at a 5-hour lunch with that person? Would you sit in a closed car with locked doors for 7 hours on a road trip with that person? If you can look at me and say, yes, well, bless you, you don't need this session, and here's your money back.
Right. So boundaries sometimes is about recognizing, there might be a moment in time and space where you need to sort of like attend to other things that are in your purview than listening all the time to the inner critic. So we need to attend to the inner critic sometimes, but we also need to set certain limits and boundaries so that we can get on with our daily lives.
Exactly.
The other aspect here is about giving ourselves tons and tons and tons of compassion.
You're so good with that.
This can be really difficult for people to understand. Like, how do I be caring or compassionate with my inner critic when I just want it to go away? I want to kill it, right? So this is about sort of recognizing, like you're saying, if there's like this inner child part of you, or you can see this part of you sort of as this hurt, wounded child, you wouldn't be, as an adult, killing it or kicking it or saying, get up or get over it, or, all this sort of barrage of statements that you're telling yourself, right? So if you can see some aspect of love, of care, of worthiness within yourself, right? If you can kind of conjure up memories, instances where you felt cared for, taken in and really loved by someone, if there's instances where you felt a sense of freedom from this inner critic, sometimes even just remembering those instances, all the permutations, using your 5 senses, that can sometimes help to create this paradigm shift and make it easier from that place to be compassionate with yourself.
Exactly. And he is so great at compassion. You're even good at compassion with yourself. I'm better at compassion with like my clients and friends. I'm not as good with myself and I've been called on that a couple times.
I hear you. Again, I'm human just like everybody else. Yeah. And there's certain moments when I hear a barrage of the old critic voice and whatnot, and I have to practice this too. It's not necessarily that it ever goes away entirely. Sometimes we need, again, some of that mindful discernment that can come with the inner critic. So it's about learning how to navigate it differently and exercise those tools of greater compassion over time, from birth till death, probably.
Exactly. Yeah. And you were also talking about something which was interesting, where sometimes we really just want to throttle our inner critic, and being compassionate can be real challenging.
Yeah.
The technique of putting it as if it were, and again, a make-believe exercise, somebody else, how would you handle that? There are some techniques that are really interesting, that somebody had done a fire burning ceremony, where you can take every nasty thing you've ever said, write it down on a piece of paper, and then, in a safe environment, of course,
right.
Light it up, right? So some people have done little symbolic things like that with things and behaviors and patterns that were sabotaging their happiness. And so that's something else to consider as a symbolic exercise to release.
Yeah, and any kind of self-soothing, self-caring sort of strategies that you use, putting on soothing music, some candles, some incense, a warm shower, curling up on a couch with a blanket or pillows.
Binge watching Netflix.
Right? Any of those kinds of activities that give you, again, a visceral experience of warmth, of cozying up, of care, compassion. Sometimes that in and of itself can evoke that internally as well.
Exactly.
Right?
So that's how you start to tame your inner critic, so that you wind up like James and I years later down the road. Yes. evolved, enlightened, laughing at our inner critic, and then crying when it tries to beat us up again.
Right?
Yeah.
Again, this is about incremental steps, going
Yeah.
from hating to intolerance to tolerance to acceptance to appreciation of all of who you
It's
are.
a cha-cha. All right, so onward to healthy, happy, and whole, and taming your inner critic.
Yes.
Work with discernment, compassion, and mindfulness, and have a fabulous, fabulous day.
All right, take care, everyone.